So I really didn't think I'd be driving this car for fun after the road trip I just went on, but I had this idea for a video and I figured let's go out and let's make it happen. So anyway, I've owned this car for about 3 months. I picked it up in May of this year, right at the beginning. It was like the first week of May. It's about to be the first week of August, so it's been 3 months. In that time, I've driven it about 4,000 miles, and if you've watched any of the other videos about this car, you know that I really have not been super impressed. Like, it does a really good job. It's a good car. Like, without a doubt, it is objectively a good car. It's quick enough, it's comfortable. I just drove 4,000 miles, and it is very comfortable, especially for one person. It has enough power, but in my opinion, it's a little slow, but that goes back to the car I came from, right? I just had before this, I had a C5 Z06, and if you watch my old videos, I have tons of videos about that car, but it made about 460 wheel, and if we're being conservative, that's roughly, say, 500 at the crank. So it has 200 horsepower more than this, if not almost double the power that this car had. So to me, I'm very desensitized and it feels pretty slow. Even with the Sport Chrono, it's not really, it doesn't scratch that go fast itch, and it doesn't really make any cool noises like the Lotus does. So to me, it leaves a little to be desired. However, I had a lot of time to think because this was a solo road trip, and I was thinking about some of my other cars and what other cars I could get if I were to sell this. And I've kind of come to the conclusion that, in my opinion, the C5 Z06 is the best car you can buy if you want a, kind of double duty track car that you can daily drive if you want, that you can take to the grocery store and pick up stuff. You can move stuff with it. You can do a lot with a C5Z. And in my head, thinking like, okay, I think I want to sell this car. What do I get? I don't want another Corvette. I had my Z for 10 years almost. An LS3 C6 is similarly priced, and I think they're better cars, but they're similar enough that I think I've gotten that experience already. So other cars in the $25,000 range, that would be your E90 M3 is kind of for a rougher one, a really nice E46 M3. You can get a BRZ or an FRS, a GT86, something from that family, but there really aren't that many pure sports cars at that price point. I think you can get an ND Miata maybe for about that much. But the thing that the C5Z has that the other cars really lack is it has problems, but they are things that can be addressed and you don't have to worry about them again. And that's one thing the LS3 C6 has over it, is it doesn't really have as many problems. But to me, that's always been my beef with the E46 M3 and the E90 M3 is they are very, very high maintenance cars, and I get that, it's a motorsport inspired engine put into a street car, so they're going to be higher maintenance. That does make sense. I get it. However, in my opinion, the E46 especially is just not a great car for that amount of money. The fact that the rod bearings are wear items on them, to me, is very much a deal breaker. Because the service interval is relatively short. It's not like you do it once and you're good for life. Similarly to the, the E90, you have to do the rod bearings periodically. I think the recommendation I see most people say is like 60 or 80K. Like, to me, that is absolutely insane. And I recognize that most people that are buying these cars at $20,000 are buying them as toys. They're not daily drivers. They're not looking to put 1,200 miles a month on them like you would on a daily driver. But the fact that none of the major issues with those cars can be fixed once, be fixed right, and be done for life, to me is just not acceptable. And it makes it hard for me to consider them as a good car that I would consider buying. And that kind of comes back to this car as well, right? I think everyone knows that the flat sixes have IMS issues. The 996 had the IMS issues. The Caymans have the same issue, and they're not serviceable, or at least on the 996 you could do the service. They're not serviceable on this car. So that is always in the back of my mind, and I think they've concluded that the failure rates on these were a lot lower than they were on the 996s. It's much more palatable. It's much more of a normal failure rate as like just a simple part failure, as opposed to a major design flaw that leads to failure. You know, in my mind, there is a pretty significant difference there, but it's not fixable. And then you have the bore scoring issue on top of that. So like if you're in the market and you're saying, okay, I've got 25 grand to spend, I don't want to spend a ton of money on it in the time I own it, otherwise you might as well just buy a different car. What am I going to end up with? With this car, you pretty much have to always keep in mind that there's a good chance you're going to spend $10,000 without any labor, you know, just parts, on an engine. And to me, that kind of sucks. Like, the car's fun, it's not that fun. Sure, you can get a .2, you can get a .2 for, you know, 30 grand, upper 20s for a rougher one, but you're probably going to spend about $30,000 on them, which puts you in like F80 territory, and they have issues too. And I really don't think it's the same class of car, right? This is a pure sports car, not a tuned up sedan, effectively. So the Z has its issues, and I know everyone's going to point out its issues. You know, the harmonic balancers do come off. That's a common problem on all of the LS engines, but it's easy to fix. It's hard on a C5 compared to, say, like a Chevy truck or a Camaro or something. Like, the steering rack does make it inconvenient, but it's something you can do once and be done for life. You know, you can get any aftermarket balancer and an ARP bolt, do it once, reuse it if you do a cam, and be set. You know, you have nothing to worry about from that point on. The C5Z is like, some years had valve spring issues. The valve springs are fairly easy to change, and again, you can do it once and be done. You know, you can put a set of BTR springs or even a set of like newer GM performance springs in the car and be free of that issue for the life of the car. You know, that's the big thing that car has that I think some of these other cars lack, is the long-term support. You know, I'm a big fan of, let's just do it once and do it right. I will spend the money to fix a problem if I know I can fix it for good. Like, if this car had a serviceable IMS, I would consider pulling the engine out and doing the clutch at the same time. You know, the car has 92,000 on it. There is a good chance it's going to need a clutch soon. There's a good chance it needs an IMS. It can have bore scoring issues sooner than later, and I would never really know. So, you know, if I had the ability to, I would fix it. But that ability doesn't exist because there's no service, there's no repair parts available to properly fix it. You know, I think some companies were working on something, but I think it's only for certain years and stuff like that. And, you know, if we're talking E46 M3, we have to fix the subframes in the back. You have to do the valve, the rod bearings. There's Vanos issues, and they're maintenance items. You know, it's not something that you do once and you're done. That's kind of the point I keep coming back to, where you buy a C5Z or an LS3 C6, you're set. You know, I put about 80,000 miles on that car in the 10 years I owned it, because it was a daily for me for a while. And other than a couple radiators and a couple AC compressors, and a lot of that was just due to shitty parts, I really never had major issues. I made a whole video breaking down, like, what did it cost for me to own that car, because I bought the car when I was 20. It was a big stretch for me to buy it, and you know, it got me through college, it got me through the beginning of my career. I had a lot of fun with that car. I started tracking cars with that car. That was my first introduction to, you know, the magic of the LS platform, and I don't regret any of it. You know, I think the only thing I regret is building that engine and not just keeping it a full bolt-on car. And that kind of comes down to the other thing, is like, if you really want to modify a car, there is tons of support for LS platforms, as I think everybody knows. You know, the LS Swap the World thing has really taken hold. And yeah, the Gen 3 is dated. It won't make as much power as an LS3. There's a lot of other stuff that, you know, it could do better. But that doesn't mean it's not a ton of fun. And you always have to consider the aftermarket support, what it costs. You know, it's cheap to build an LS. It is not cheap to build this engine or really do anything to get this car a little more power. Like, I think I would absolutely love this car with 100 more horsepower. Like, without a doubt, it would be way more fun if it was like a 400 horsepower car or even 350. It's kind of the same complaint I have about the BRZ family, is they just don't have the power. And yes, you can have a lot of fun with a momentum car. I love driving cars like momentum cars. You know, even when I would go to the track, sometimes I would put the Corvette in 6th gear and just coast around the track and just try not to scrub as much speed as I possibly could and see who I could catch with just like, you know, lugging the engine on the straights and carrying speed through the corners. And that's one thing I've noticed with this car, is like it really likes that. It likes that a lot. This is a car that's much better for my driving style than the Corvette was. And I do wonder, like, if I tracked this car, would I just absolutely fall in love with it? Because I take drives like this, and I think I probably would. But it just leaves a lot to be desired in terms of power. And obviously, like, we're on a back road. There's intersections and people, and there's a lot of kayakers and cyclists and stuff up here. I'm not trying to ruin anybody's life, including my own, or the resale value of this car by stuffing it into one of these trees. This was the idea I had. You know, talk about the car, take it for a rip. It just took me longer to get here than I expected because I got distracted and missed my turn. This is where everybody crashes, usually. They go right up this driveway into that wall. But I did this drive in the Z a couple times, and it was terrifying because it's such a tight, twisty, bouncy, sketchy road, and that car didn't have working ABS. It had a lot of power. I could kind of do what I'm doing now, where I just leave it in third and just kind of chill. But it was a lot of mental work in that car to not spin the tires or the car, and we caught trouble. So anyway, that's about the end of the road anyway. So let me know what you all think. Is the C5Z the best value for your money if you want a really a good, reliable, low maintenance track toy? Can its little issues be overcome and make it the best of those 5 or 6 cars I listed? I'd even go as far as to say it's better than a 996. And I mean, I've driven one, but not driven it extensively. But I think it compares to this car. It might be worse than this car. So let me know what you think. Leave a comment. Thanks for watching.